There's murders that go down in crime history that are never forgotten, and they're used as references for future cases. We've come across a new killer with a face that we won't soon forget. His name is Bryan. His face has now been added to the family crime book with other people that have chose to go down a different road. He's young, he's educated, and oddly enough, he resembles the looks of Ted Bundy from over 40 years ago as of now. At this moment, Bryan's been accused of viciously murdering 4 students in Idaho in the middle of the night while they were sleeping, unaware, unprotected, and dreaming. Just kids going to college, living the best part of their life. As time goes on, more comes out about Bryan. There's no doubt that we're going to learn things about Bryan, maybe even things that he's done that we don't know about, and things that he was planning on, but never achieved it yet. Month by month that goes by, that goes into a year, the courts will decide Bryan's fate, and in no doubt, photos of the crime scene will come out that will be pictures of nightmares. The crime scene itself is in no doubt a complete mess, as we know the weapon that was used was a knife. The case has attracted so many people, from crime enthusiasts and just from day-to-day people looking through the news. We haven't seen anything this vicious in decades when it comes to murders by people that seem normal. People are murdered every day in terrible ways, but when it happens to people that it shouldn't happen to in a weird enough way, and it's done by a person that doesn't look like they should have done it, it grabs a human's attention, much like a drug. We've had men break into sorority houses, murder students, but it's been quite some time since we've seen anything like this. When you really take a moment to think about what Bryan is accused of doing, it seems unattainable. How long did Bryan think of doing this? How long was the compulsion eating him alive inside to act on it? He took 4 lives in one night, and he chose to do it the messiest way possible. In a cold, snowy night, right in the heart of the town, he took risk with achieving the murders, but not achieving going unseen. It's known at this point that the house that Bryan walked into that night was a house that was known to be visited by many people throughout the years. In the last 3 months, the house was having more noise complaints, even capturing the victims on camera. Bryan is said to be described as socially awkward, with a long history of interpersonal problems from friends and acquaintances around him, even having an addiction to heroin in the past. The word charming doesn't seem to be found with Bryan. He was also a crime enthusiast, studying many cases and having an obsession with the BTK killer, and in no doubt, probably studying how BTK broke into homes. The victims that Bryan made in this case are rumored to have so many stab wounds that this has been seen before in cases in the past. When you have a continued motion of stabbing with a victim, it usually means the murderer has uncontrollable rage and extreme anger that's been building up and now being released. He doesn't care about the noise, the mess, the hurt, the pain, the brutality of what he's doing. He's releasing something that he has inside of him, something he's been carrying for many years. The situation that we see with these murders, very similar to the murders of Ted Bundy's last attempt of his desires. Bryan showed rage with these murders, much the same way Bundy did at Florida State College when he broke into dorms and beat a handful of women to death with a log. It was messy and just confusing for people to understand, much like what we are seeing right now with Bryan's mess that he's made. What would please a person to do this on innocent people? Maybe like Ted Bundy, having pure rage towards women. That's what we're seeing with Bryan. Maybe people are saying the wrong things about Bryan, saying that he just wanted to prove and show his dominance, that he could take someone's life. But maybe it's more than that. Bryan already knew he could take someone's life. Maybe he was just wanting to settle a desire he's had for a long time. He wanted the smell, the mess of blood, and the shock of what he would find in the house that night. The word incel has been used for Bryan. Incels like being known for what they have done against other people, especially when they murder people. They like to toy with people. This is something that BTK also did, and Ted Bundy. But on the one hand, it seems to be that Bryan wanted to commit a crime where he would not be caught. We know that Bryan was talking about the murders to people around him, friends, just people in his day-to-day life, his circle, asking if they had heard about the murders and how people were reacting to it. There's no doubt that Bryan had been watching this house. He knew who lived there, he knew how to get in, and he somewhat knew what he was going to get himself into. But much like BTK, he ran into unknown situations. The following days after the murder, Bryan goes right back into his life. It's even said that people around Bryan are saying he seems more chipper than usual, more talkative. How many more people are there like Bryan that seem to be dealing with this situation in their mind, of acting out violent situations on young women are there walking around us today that are trying to marriage real life with fantasy in their head? I'm sure there's many more like Bryan, trying to suppress the urge they have by visiting the dark web like many other serial killers, but eventually the compulsion of the physical act takes over. It's been found that Bryan had been around the house even far back as August, months before the murder, from Wi-Fi pings from his phone, doing what killers do. We've seen this with many other serial killers, scoping out houses, locations, something that BTK did quite often, where he would stalk a house for days, sometimes even months. This is what killers do when they make it up in their mind that they're going to fully merge themselves in the fantasy. There's no doubt when Bryan was walking around the house during the day, but more than likely during the night, looking in windows and checking to see if the doors were unlocked. It was a rush and a pleasure that he only got from peeking in on what he knew would be his victims. Maybe Bryan was one of the many people that would walk into the house during the parties that would cater to many people around the neighborhood, learning the ins and outs of the house. Apart from the victims and Bryan himself, what seemed to be the biggest elements of the whole case centers around one thing, is the fact that Bryan used a knife, a big knife. This shows that Bryan was looking to cause pain. He wanted screaming, he wanted a messy scene, maybe even the chance to be stopped and fight his way out. In the coming months, or even years, we might even hear from Bryan himself that he enjoyed the experience of being in the house that night. We'll learn about his obsession with death, maybe even things he wanted to do that particular night, but was overwhelmed, and maybe not knowing how many people there were really in the house that night. Maybe he was just looking for one person alone in a bedroom. There's no doubt that there's people that are looking at Bryan that had the same desires and elements that Bryan has, and wondering if they could do the same thing. Hopefully Bryan's case just stays Bryan's case and doesn't trigger copycats. People are saying that Bryan is 1 out of 1,000 people, but really, I think it's much less than that. There might shockingly be more young men in their 20s that have terrible secrets, desires they suppress, that are walking around amongst us right now, maybe even listening to this. But soon enough, Bryan will have what he wants, and that's to be heard, either pleading innocent or admitting what he's done. And if proven guilty, Bryan could even face the death penalty. That would most likely not happen for a decade, but there's no doubt we'll be hearing and seeing from Bryan soon enough. The story's just being unfolded, more and more being released day by day. Bryan seems like he may even want to be in control of the situation still, as much as he can be, so he may surprise everyone and go into detail about the crime, or wait for some kind of plea bargain. But this is the new face in the world of killers.